Hi, this is Lisa Lofton here, the artist behind the Vintage Florida to Jacksonville Beyond exhibition, and I hope you enjoy this little video tour that I've prepared. The first thing I'd like to talk to you about is the giant poster called Vintage Florida. It's a sunshine state of mind, and basically this is where the series came from. If you look at the state, it's a collage of a lot of different pieces I did. And how did I come up with this, you might ask? Well, let's look. I like to say this is how I found my sunshine state of mind during a pandemic. And basically, you sit there in your house, you're isolated to a certain degree, and you're trying to think of things. You look back at the past and you say, what really made me happy? And one of the things I thought about was when I was a child, my mother and my father, my two brothers and my sister and I would all jump in the station wagon and go from Kentucky down to Florida to visit my grandparents. And on the way, we'd always stop at like a Stuckey's or a Waffle House for breakfast. And on the tables, once you got into Florida, there were always these wonderful placemats that had everything you could think of in the world as far as pictures go, as a visual delicacy, basically. You'd have space rockets, you'd have alligators, you'd have, your flamingos. You can see them all right here. You can see the dolphins. And I was like, what a wonderful state. Look at all the different things there are to do. And when I thought about this, I thought, I think I want to capture this in individual paintings, kind of represent all those different little pictures that I saw. So when I started doing that, some of them just really made me smile. So it kind of got me out of that whole, slump that I was in, I guess, from the pandemic, and got me into painting some more and this series. And I've really continued it since, because there's so much to the state. So imagine us, 4 little kids and 2 adults, driving about 14 to 15 hours. Then all of a sudden, we're seeing palm trees. We're getting really excited. We know we're close to the state line from Georgia into Florida, and we're just getting wild at that point, because we know once we get into Florida, we get to stop at the welcome station, and that was quite a treat, because we'd been there before, and I had my orange cup from Disney World, and it was just free orange juice, was like the little wax figures, all kinds of different things. So my first piece, it was, the Welcome to Florida sign. I have my orange bird cup. I have the little cup that my parents would get. We didn't have the phones with the GPS, so there's a map and there's a little slice of orange. So you see the Welcome to Florida, the Sunshine State. You see one of the old stations, depending on what part of the state you're coming into, what welcome station you would get to. And I have a little picture there of my orange bird cup. And then there's an old picture of people being served free orange juice at one of the welcome stations. So this was really special. I mean, when you've been stuck in the car for a long time and you get to pick up free brochures and find out more about the state, it was really a great welcome. This is definitely one of my favorite pieces. I like to say more oranges means liquid sunshine. And one of the things I would do once I did move to Florida was I would go from Jacksonville down to see my mother in Spring Hill, Florida. And she was sick during the pandemic, and unfortunately she passed from COVID. And one thing I did remember a lot was all the times that I had gone to see her in Hernando County, that it was very special to have the opportunity to go and see her. And when I was driving down 301, I'd get to all the different billboards that would say 15 miles, 10 miles, 6 miles, 4 miles to Citra. And I knew that Citra was the orange shop, and I love these billboards. I mean, Citra was basically my halfway point to getting to my mom's house and having a visit, so it was really, really special. So one day I decided to pull off the road and take a picture of one of the orange billboards, and I stopped at the orange shop. I mean, this is like Florida to me. These orange stands that have been around forever, the orange groves. You can see one of the old pictures. Citrus started selling citrus commercially during the Civil War. And in 1936, it seemed natural for them to offer it to travelers. And so since 1936, that city has been selling oranges. Their groves are not as plentiful now because of the freezes, but it's still there, and it's open seasonally, and it's a lot of fun to go to. I mean, you can get anything from orange perfume, orange wine. It's there. If you go to their website, you'll find out that they actually have recipes for like orange cream pie. So it's a lot of fun. Of course, orange honey. So check it out. It's a very important of our Florida history. The orange groves in Florida were so plentiful all the way up here to the north, and then all of a sudden we started getting some major freezes. So this represents like one of the biggest packing plants for oranges and groves that was in the middle of the state, close to Orlando. I think it's in Deltona. But I call this before the big freeze because this is what that plant looked like prior to the freeze, and when it was really thriving. This plant was started by Theodore Strawn. He was a native of Illinois that settled in West Volusia County, and he started this orange packing operation in 1882. Now, as I said, the freeze came in 1983, and I think it was his grandson that said that was the year that the orange trees were killed down to the stumps. It's a shame. I mean, it's in the Florida historical sites. There's still quite a few of the buildings left, but they're in a pretty bad state. One of the big things were the Bob White oranges, and those were supposed to be some of the sweetest, best oranges that there were. You can see a little map there of how to get to the location, and also just a bunch of the orange guys, the orange pickers over to the left, and a picker's ticket. It's really an interesting part of our history. I felt like if I wanted to talk visually about Florida, one thing I had to hit upon was seafood. Love seafood. Love shrimp. Where can you get great shrimp? You can get great shrimp in Mayport. And when you really start thinking about Mayport, it's not a new place. And I didn't realize how old it was, even driving there. I don't know how many times. Then all of a sudden I really started looking at the signage and things like that. And I like to use billboards a lot in my backgrounds and then the things I'm talking about in the foreground. So in this particular case, I noticed that this was founded in 1562. Well, I was born in 1962, so it only made sense to call it Mayport, a village 400 years older than me. And I put some of my favorite things in the foreground. As I said, I do love shrimp. So one of the cool things is how old some of these seafood places are, such as Singleton Seafood Shack. And it was started by Captain Ray Singleton. He was a 9th generation descendant of a Minorcan indentured slave brought to Florida in 1758. More recently, we have Safe Harbor, which has delicious seafood as well. And it's also a seafood market, so you can go down there and get all kinds of stuff, from scallops to shrimp, crab, you name it. So Mayport's a lot of fun to visit if you like seafood. It's also an interesting place because of its history. It's got a haunted house. It's got a lighthouse. So I highly recommend it as a place to visit. Okay, how can you talk about Florida and seafood without mentioning our oysters? And those come from Apalachicola. It's one of, they talk about it as the shoals of gold there because the oysters are so good. And I think it has to do with the sediments from the Apalachicola River. But you can see in the painting itself, we've got an oyster, we've got one of the trucks loading up. And it was a fun piece to do. The oysters were Apalachicola's first seafood industry. Oysters were sold locally as early as 1836. They were harvested much the same as they are today, with scissor-shaped palms that they use to hoist them aboard the shallow draft skiffs that they take out. What's a shame is the overfishing and drought that has been going on has caused the fisheries to be closed for up to about 5 years to try to help to restore the oyster beds. In the picture, you can see one of the skiffs up in the left-hand corner with the fellow with the tongs, and then down in the bottom you can see that they had the folks shucking those oysters and all the shells. There would be mountains of shells at the different locations. Here's another painting. It's called The Lobster House Restaurant. The painting's called Of Lobsters and Monsters, and I'll explain that in a minute, unless you already know why. This restaurant used to be right on the St. Johns River on the south bank. It was a very popular place. They had dancing, seafood, of course. They usually had the lobster tanks where people could pick out their lobsters. It was really a nice restaurant for quite a few years. It eventually burned down. One of the reasons I like this restaurant so much was that it was in a pivotal scene shot for The Revenge of the Creature, which was the second movie of the creature from the Black Lagoon. And in the movie, it's great. You can see the Jacksonville downtown skyline. The monster actually comes up onto the deck of the restaurant, walks inside, grabs the heroine, and takes off into the St. Johns River. And I'll tell you, that was dangerous. They said that the diver or stuntman almost didn't make it because he had so many problems traversing the current. My next piece is called Jacksonville, the winter film capital of the world. And it really was big into the silent movie era. It was one of the places that filming took place quite often because of the weather, obviously. You can see downtown, that's Hogan and Adams, and we just have a movie set crew doing a mob movie. It would have been a silent film. And by 1916, there were at least 30 film studios in Jacksonville. One of the really cool film studios was Norman Studios, and the owner, he used all African American actors. He used everyone on his sets were African American. He was very dedicated to that. There's still a really nice museum over in Arlington for Norman Studios, and if you get a chance to go visit that, that's a good idea. Now, why did this film industry, if there was 30 studios here, leave Jacksonville. Well, what happened was the residents of Jacksonville started getting really upset when the film studios were doing dangerous stunts on their city streets. I think they ran a car into the river once, and there was one particular time when they hired just folks to be extras, and it was supposed to be the police versus some villains, and 100 people showed up. They went ahead and used them, and it ended up being a big brawl in the middle of the street. So things like that did not endear the studios to the folks in Jacksonville at the time. And when the new conservative mayor, John W. Martin, was elected in 1917, it pretty much put the final nail in the coffin for Jacksonville's film studio career. Another place that a lot of movies were shot locally in, I guess the 50s and the 60s was Marineland. It was actually called, I think, Marine Studios, or in the when it first opened. The really important part, it was the first oceanarium in the entire world. I call this painting Sea Florida at Marineland. I like puns, don't ask me why. But you can see a lot of the things, and you can see the sign that it's south of St. Augustine on A1A. There's an orange in there somewhere too. I usually, with the Florida series, include an orange in my paintings. Sometimes I'll just use like an orange soda. In this particular case, it's not the sun-kissed, it's an actual orange, and the key would be to find it. The more I looked into information about Marineland, the more interesting I thought it was. In June of 1938, Marineland, Florida opened as Marine Studios, and the park welcomed over 20,000 visitors on its first day, and it became famous as the world's first oceanarium. You can see the newspaper ad that nearly 30,000 people jammed into oceanfront as Marine Studios opened. Marine Studios was created to help Hollywood filmmakers produce underwater scenes for their motion pictures. And again, one of my favorites is Revenge of the Creature, because it also took place up in Jacksonville. But, of course, of the Black Lagoon fame. And it was also Clint Eastwood's debut film. So I thought that was really funny. Next in my Florida series, we're going to go see Space. It's a Florida tang. And again, with the puns, but you can see the sign to go to Cocoa Beach, where it's the space capital of the USA. It's a sign for one of the Starlight Motel in the background, and of course a jar of Tang, orange juice, and an orange. And we'll get into why we use Tang. So, in 1959, the first rocket launch took place at Cape Canaveral. I included that Starlight Motel because at the time, the space program affected the entire community. You could go there and it was Starlight this, it was all kinds of things, like things that looked like spaceships all over the place. It really affected the culture there. Florida is known for its one-of-a-kind orange juice, but you'll notice we use Tang in this particular instance. But the reason for this was that when the astronauts went into space, they had to drink reclaimed water from the machinery, and it evidently tasted very, very bad. So they would use an orange powder drink to make it palatable. You can see some of the little commercial up there with the two aliens in the Tang jar. And of course, there's John Glenn, and he later on, somebody asked him about that, and he says he was not a big fan of Tang either, especially having to drink that orange drink when he was in space. Next, I just wanted to talk about Daytona Beach, because what goes on in Daytona Beach is racing. So Daytona, Florida on the Fast Track is another one of my pieces. And racing in the state has a long history. Beach beach racing started in 1903, and it was actually on the beach, and it lasted well into the 50s. The beach was about 27 miles long, flat, and it was 500 feet wide, so it was a great place for racing. In the very beginning, with the horseless carriages, in 1903, it was really only the wealthy folks that could race because the cars were so expensive. But the inaugural Daytona 500 was held in 1959, and it coincided with the opening of the Speedway. And since 1982, it has been the season opening race of the Cup Series. It also has the Daytona 200, which is the motorcycle racing. This is just another important part, I think, of who Florida is. And we'll take a look at the moon over 17. In this particular case, the moon is a moon pie. You can see I didn't actually put an orange in this one, but I did put an orange knee-high. I just remembered stopping at full service stations and, getting snacks. You stop at like a station today means it's going to be self-service. You swipe your card, fill up, and then you drive off. But you probably remember refueling stops, being greeted by a gas station attendant, and they'd fill up your car, they'd check under the hood, they'd wash your windows. It was kind of cool. And a lot of times in these stations were like the social hub for small towns. So if you go along, 17 used to be the main drag going through Florida down south, and there were tons and tons of these old filling stations, and you would find somebody sitting out front having a soda, maybe a moon pie, talking. So you see two older women in the painting just sitting in their old folding chairs and having a conversation while they drink their knee-highs, and then we wait for the knee-high truck to trundle off. Subject of transportation in Florida, we got to hit upon trains. Especially in Jacksonville, we have CSX, and the terminal downtown used to be, instead of a convention center, it used to be a big time train station. It was absolutely beautiful. And I call this painting the Orange Blossom Special Comes to Jacksonville, because it actually did. There's still one of the cars from the Orange Blossom Special sitting outside of the terminal downtown. What was really cool is when the Orange Blossom Special stopped in Jax, all the schools were closed so the kids and their families could visit the train. In 2 days, there were about 30,000 people that came out to see the train. The big attraction was it was a diesel electric versus a steam locomotive, and it looked completely different. It had Pullman cars, and it was very Art Deco and neat design. So for a lot of people, it was like seeing the space shuttle for the first time. And you can see up there just the announcement about the Orange Blossom Special. Johnny Cash sang a song about the Orange Blossom Special. The two writers of the song were said to have been visiting Jacksonville when they wrote the song. You can see our beautiful train station that is now the convention center, and you can see one of the old pictures of everybody out celebrating because of the new train design and its visit to their town. Well, we had to get to the beach at some point, and why not Jax Beach? I lived out in Jax Beach for quite a few years. And for Jacksonville Beach, of course, the lifeguard station is the iconic place. When I first moved here, we still were able to drive onto the beach, and there was the walkovers, and you would drive underneath and go onto the beach. I call this Sand, Sea, and Saving in Jacksonville Beach. You may have noticed in the foreground that, we had an orange popsicle and a copper tone. They all seem to just go with it, as well as the young men on the truck that were part of the American Red Cross Life-Saving Corps. In 1914, the American Red Cross started a water safety program. Before that, it was swim at your own risk, and a lot of people died. The Pablo Beach Life-Saving Corps became part of the Red Cross. In 1946, the Lifeguard Station number 1, which is the one we know and love, was completed and replaced its predecessor, which can be seen up in the picture. That was of wood construction, and it would not do very well during the storms. You can see the folks in their bathing suits, the part of the Corps, and that's from the Beaches Museum archives. And then you can also see down below the lifeguard station today, but I think that was from probably around the 50s and 60s, 70s. That continued on for quite a while, that you had that walkover and you could actually get down on the beach with your car. It's probably not the best idea. It's not great for the turtles, but was like that at one point in time. Shell shock in Florida. One of the things I always loved to do when I was younger and we would visit Florida is to go to one of the souvenir shops. And Shell Shock in Florida is Alan Davis's Shell souvenir shop up in Pensacola area. Shell Shock in Florida depicts one of the state's most famous souvenir and shell shops, Alan Davis's Shells and Souvenir Store. And it was located just across Pensacola Bay Bridge on US Highway 98 in Gulf Breeze. It was one of the best examples of an early tourist shop in Florida, and the shell shop stayed open for more than 50 years. And in my painting, I have like one of those old metal calendars that you would flip, and a puka shell necklace, some orange blossom perfume. Here you can see some old coasters that somebody might have picked up, and there's an actual photo back there of the shell shop itself. But I thought that was important to include on this journey through vintage Florida. Where else are you going to find a city of mermaids except in Florida? Yeah, that was thanks to one man's efforts. So we have Weeki Wachee, Florida, because it has a beautiful spring. In the painting itself, you'll see things that you might take to the spring, as well as brochure for Weeki Wachee and their big sign that's outside of the actual park. Each day, more than 117 million gallons of clear, fresh, 74-degree water bubbles up out of the caverns to make this spring. On a hot day, this means visitors can really cool off. In 1946, Newton Perry, a former U.S. Navy man who trained Navy frogmen to swim underwater in World War II, scouted out Weeki Wachee as a good site for a new business. He also invented a method of breathing underwater from a free-flowing air hose that supplied oxygen from an air compressor. This is how he was able to have the mermaids. They would swim down to the bottom, take a breath, do their acrobatics underwater, and we had mermaids in Florida. They also had the underwater show. They had a little boat ride through the springs. They also now have like a little water slide park into the spring itself. It's such a nice place to go on a hot day, and the springs are beautiful. My Florida journey is just now taking me into St. Augustine, and it's one of Florida's great zoological parks. In my opinion, it's been around for very, very many years, and you can see the one of the signs that they had. One of the bags that they used to give out, a little book you could buy in the gift shop, and a parrot, because they have one of the best bird breeding programs that you can find. After people have been to the beach a few times. They're always looking for some other experience that's very Florida, and I have to say the alligator farm is definitely one. I had a friend of mine visit California, and his big thing was, how in the world do you live with those things? And that was one of the places he had to go to. He had to see it. He's like, don't they come up into your garages? And I said, yeah, they're all over the place. So he was like on the lookout the whole time. And I really have to wonder how they live with us as opposed to us living with them. But the alligator farm in St. Augustine has been a long-time tourist attraction and a zoological park. And like I said, it's one of the best breeding records around. But you can see some of the old photos from the park, and you can see the inspiration from the bag that I found and one of the old brochures. So it's still going today, and they're doing great. Getting specifically into Jacksonville, recently somebody had, look, I have quite a few paintings that just have to do with Jacksonville, and the owner of the resident news group, Pamela Williams, called me recently, and she had seen some of my pieces and asked would I be willing to do a painting for the cover, but she wanted it to cover a lot of ground. It's like we need to cover Murray Hill, Avondale, Riverside, San Marco, Ortega, San Jose, St. Nicholas. So, and then also have a mention of the fact that, this is Jacksonville's 200th birthday. So I did a 2D painting. As you can see, it's just an acrylic on canvas, and I tried to include pretty much everything I could think of that she wanted. There's also one of the historic houses. You can see all these iconic stuff that she had wanted. She wanted to make sure certain places were represented in the painting with certain things like the San Marco Lions. There's also a little bit of the Treaty Oak. There's a life statue from Memorial Park, the old Five Points Beacon, the Murray Hill Theater. Murray Hill had to be in there too. I like to put some of the street signs in. Stockton Park. You can see the logo for the Timuquana Country Club, the San Jose Country Club clock, the gate. So if you look around, there's the little entry piece for St. Nicholas. There's a lot going on here, but that was the point. Also included in the magazine were paintings that I had done to represent the area town, and this is just a magazine. It's a newcomer's guide for the historic district of Jacksonville. So there were very many places represented, from Springfield and downtown, San Jose, San Marco, Riverside. So in this particular journey, you're going to see, for instance, the twilight of Five Points, and that was because they were getting ready to change that and remove the old Five Points Beacon, and it has been changed since then. You can see Treaty Oak was also one of the representations for San Marco, which is, it has a really interesting story behind it as well. San Jose, it's just, they have the gate as you go down the old gate. They have the clock at the country club. Almost all the country clubs have some really cool clocks that were all designed by the same person. And then there's just a depiction of the downtown waterfront, and that was actually from a painting that I had done as a commission for the Museum of Science and History. And if you look around, you'll see other Jacksonville things that you will recognize on display today. And I don't want to keep you any longer, and if you hung out with me for this entire audio video tour, I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful time at the library. Just one more thing, a lot of these things you can get prints over at the Art Center Cooperative, and original artwork, not only by me, but some of my other member artists. If you look downstairs, you'll see one of our artists is Susan Smith, is doing her abstract show, and it's interesting because she gets into the mind of an abstract artist. But if you want to get a hold of me, just call me at my number or email me at loftonweb@gmail.com. I'm on Instagram at loftonuser and Facebook Lisa-Lofton. And I also have a website, lisaloftonart.com. So please visit or give me a call or send me an email and give me some feedback about this particular show if you'd like. Thank you again for visiting.